So we love talking about narcissists nowadays, right? Your ex was probably one, your boss maybe, your mom, I don't know. I bet that you catch yourself diagnosing people on a pretty consistent basis. Even if you don't say it out loud, you probably feel it. And don't worry, because honestly, this is pretty normal nowadays. It's become almost like a cultural sport of some sort, like a way of naming or defining the people that make us feel uncomfortable. But unfortunately, this habit has some major side effects. One of them being that we talk more about other people and their problems than we talk and think about ourselves. So in a way, narcissism isn't a clinical category anymore. It's like more of a moral accusation now. It's how we kind of tend to point at other people and say, you are exactly what I am not supposed to be. Self-absorbed, entitled, self-centered, shameless. And we do this thing where we draw the line between this like good empath and like bad egoist, because that's what narcissists are accused of. They're accused of being egoistic. So the empath is like a healer and the narcissist is toxic. But the problem is nothing feels safer than diagnosing evil in someone else. So what I hear when I hear people talk about narcissists or, whatever you want to call the person that you really hope to separate and differentiate yourself from, is anxiety. And in the specific case of narcissism, it's the anxiety of kind of being in a world where everyone wants to and fights over being seen. So in this world, visibility is currency, attention is survival, and moral virtue is how we kind of compete for both. We tend to point our finger at other people and say that we despise narcissists, we don't like what they do, but we don't look at how we live in an essentially narcissistic economy, in a narcissistic world, in a narcissistic society. In a way, we kind of worship visibility while condemning narcissism. And we don't repress the ego anymore. We have found a way to market it while telling ourselves that other people are bad for doing it more obviously. So yeah, we live in a narcissistic society, but not because we love ourselves so much. We live in one because all of us collectively are having a really hard time not performing for other people's recognition. And I believe that one of the main reasons why we are so obsessed with therapy speak is because we kind of don't want to look in the mirror. We don't want to see how this world has shaped us into somebody who seeks validation and approval on a consistent basis. We kind of want to pretend that our hunger for validation is somehow more pure than other people's hunger for validation. And we do that through doing this whole cultural theater thing of confession or whatever form of, validation we can get for being a decent person or for being a real person or for being an authentic person. I think that pointing the finger at narcissists might be our way of denying the powerlessness that we feel in relation to the, monstrous narcissistic machine that we are all part of. So what I want to do today is I want to be a little bit courageous and I want to look at our own narcissism. I want to reflect on the way that we tend to project to protect. And then I want to look at the real problem, the real narcissism problem, which is a societal problem. I want to look at where this manifestation of it is coming from. And I want to think about what we can actually do about it, how we can actually protect ourselves from it, and how we can free ourselves not through moral purity or detox, but through understanding, through unspooking. So let's talk about this digital mirror. You spend 5 minutes online or 5 seconds even, and you can't get away from it. It's everywhere. It's not just TikTok. It's on your regular news program. There's therapists explaining the narcissist spectrum or whatever. Then there's podcasters diagnosing their exes or something. And then there's influencers sharing trauma timelines with text overlays that say things like, read that again, It's a moral economy that's disguised as self-care in a sense, where we trade diagnosis for dopamine and then call it healing. So the narcissist discourse thrives online because it fits perfectly into the logic of the feed. It gives us a clear villain, a victim, and a reason to keep talking about ourselves under the banner of awareness. And the algorithm loves it because it's conflict packaged as compassion. Every viral how to spot a narcissist clip performs the same ritual. Pain becomes performance, and performance becomes proof of virtue. But what's interesting is how we've all kind of internalized this way of speaking, like how the internet has taught us to narrate our own lives with that terminology, which is therapy speak and like insane moral binaries. So instead of saying, I'm hurt, we say my boundaries are violated. Instead of saying I want to be loved, we say I attract emotionally unavailable people. So we translate emotion into diagnosis because it sounds more rational and more legitimate and more defensible under the public gaze. And that's kind of what social media has done. It's made our private feelings public property. So the moment that you post about your pain, it stops belonging to you. It stops being yours. It becomes content. Your story becomes something that others can interpret and share and react to. So you become both patient and therapist in a sense. You're confessor and saint, and you're victim and brand. And even the aesthetics of our feed mimic psychoanalysis in a sense, like the clean fonts and the soothing colors and the minimalist empath tone. It's like Freud through fucking Canva. So every post says, I'm aware of myself, therefore I'm good. But awareness has become a fucking performance. We don't seek understanding anymore, we seek coherence. And coherence online is aesthetics. So the self is a brand, and the caption is a symptom, and the likes are a new form of affirmation. We say that we share to connect, but we just honestly share to exist, to be reflected back, because this is our definition of existing. And philosophically, this isn't new. Foucault once said that confession was how power worked through truth, by kind of making us speak ourselves into the social order. But the difference is that now confession has gone public. We perform it in front of millions of strangers. We do this thing where we try to reveal ourselves to show people that we have nothing to hide. And I think this is why narcissism has become this insult of choice, It names the thing that we can't admit, that every act of self-expression online is also an act of self-promotion, that our honesty is fucking strategic, that our vulnerability is curated, and that our empathy, which is praised so highly in online spaces, is a form of social positioning. So the internet didn't make us narcissistic, but it gave us a perfect mirror. It gave us a large enough stage to watch. So every scroll and every post, both sides, every relatable trauma confession is a mirror. And we keep looking, not because we love ourselves, but because we don't know who we are without being seen. And that's kind of what makes this conversation so slippery. Because when we talk about narcissism nowadays, we're not just talking about personality. We're talking about survival under the gaze. We live in a world where existence feels unstable until it's verified. And I think Freud, and I know you guys hate Freud, but I don't care, okay? Freud is very relevant. Freud would call this a crisis of libido, which is the energy that once flowed into love, work, or meaning that's now directed into self-display. Lacan would say this is the mirror stage all over again, like the endless loop of trying to become the image that the other desires. And obviously this is partially what social media really is. It's a collective mirror stage of the 21st century. It's a place where we mistake being seen and being watched with being loved, where the line between confession and performance collapses completely. And if that is true, then the question isn't, why are there so many narcissists? The real question is, why do we all need this mirror so badly? Freud wrote an essay once that's, it's very controversial, but if you just read it and pull the things out of it that actually are relevant, you can get a lot from it. This essay is called On Narcissism, and it begins with something that we often forget, which is that narcissism isn't a disease. It's a stage of becoming. The infant doesn't start life with self-awareness. It starts with sensation. like hunger, warmth, and noise. And only later does the infant recognize an image of itself and fall in love with that wholeness. That first recognition, that moment of that's others and that's me, which is what Lacan talks about when he talks about the mirror stage, is the birth of the ego. And Freud called this primary narcissism. So the original self-love that holds the psyche together before it learns that the world can refuse it. Without it, we could not survive. And this is not vanity, this is cohesion. But Freud also noted that this self-love never stays intact. As soon as we start seeking love from others, we lose some of that self-certainty. We become dependent on reflection, on being loved and admired and recognized. And when that external love disappears, the self kind of folds in on itself again. It withdraws its energy and it tries to rebuild from within. And that is what Freud called secondary narcissism. And now think about that in the context of social media. Every post, every selfie, every story is a small act of secondary narcissism. It's a way of repairing the ego through the gaze of the other. Each like and each comment becomes a dose of psychic glue. And this is not superficial, it's existential. Freud would say that we're not addicted to attention. We are addicted to reassurance. Then Lacan would come along and make the whole thing even more unsettling. Because for him, that first moment of self-recognition, which is the mirror stage, is actually a fucking misrecognition. So the child sees its reflection as whole and coordinated and perfect, but internally it feels fragmented and chaotic and dependent, like a fantasy that gives the ego structure. And that is the fantasy that we keep chasing forever. The fantasy of appearing whole to ourselves. So we want to feel like the image we project. We want to be that. We want to inhabit the version of ourselves that the mirror reflects back. And on social media, that mirror is no longer made of glass, it's made of pixels and feedback loop. So it doesn't just reflect, it actually quantifies. So you don't see yourself. You do not see yourself. You see metrics. You can't actually see the metrics, but you see metric. Your reflection comes with numbers attached, followers, engagement, reach, whatever. And those numbers start to feel like proof of existence. They become like a new form of love. But the psychoanalytic twist here is that this gaze is not yours. It cannot ever be yours. It's always the gaze of some majority. Lacan says that the gaze always belongs to the other, like the one who sees you, right? You can pose for it, chase it, seduce it, but you can never possess it. And that's what makes the gaze so powerful. It defines you from the outside, through eyes you'll never control, through eyes through which you can never look at yourself. So it alienates you from yourself. This is the side effect of the algorithm, like a machine gaze that sees everything, it remembers everything, but it can't love. It rewards exposure, but never intimacy. And it knows what you want, but never what you are. But we keep performing for it, or we keep performing within it, as if being visible or viewing will finally make us real. So we live in a kind of digital mirror stage, a world where identity is built through unconscious reflection, but the reflection is owned by someone else. So our inner lives have become public property, right? Data points in like a vast psychological marketplace. So when we point at others and we call them narcissists, maybe what we're trying to do is disavow our dependence on that gaze. So we don't hate narcissism because it's shallow. We hate it because it exposes our own need to be seen, our own unfinished dependence on the mirror. And the narcissist just refuses to hide it. So what we have to talk about now is visibility as moral capital, because that is the second layer to this problem. We don't repress desire anymore. We aestheticize it. We don't confess to priests, we confess to our followers. Our digital selves have become small moral theaters where virtue is rehearsed daily and selfhood is a form of public art. And we call it sharing, but it's closer to performing a part in a never-ending morality play. I am the empath, I am the healer, I am the survivor, I am a loner, I am antisocial, Each role has a costume, and it has a tone, and it has some kind of brand colors. And within that cultural theater, we can find a kind of visual grammar of goodness. And this means that even something as personal as vulnerability has rules. It's a system. So it has to be framed through the grammar of that spectrum of virtue. Like, it has to be tasteful or emotionally legible in some sense. So let's use an example of a person who is kind of, how do they say, like tracing their healing online. The more that we perform healing, the less we can kind of afford that it's messy as it is, because healing is one of the most messy things that could ever exist. Because what we're branding is not actually the healing itself, it is the authenticity that we're presenting. And the more that we brand authenticity, the less authentic we are. Because online, sincerity isn't about what's true, it's about what's believable. This is where psychoanalytic theory meets post-structural theory. Freud said repression sustains civilization, but Foucault showed that in modernity, repression is replaced by performance. So in a way, power doesn't silence us anymore. It demands that we express ourselves. It wants our pain, it wants our trauma, it wants our moral convictions, anything that can be turned into data, basically. And we comply because expression now feels like existence. If we don't post, then we disappear. If we don't comment, then we disappear. So we do it, we kind of curate our inner lives, our self-awareness, our moral clarity, not to deceive others, but to stabilize ourselves under the gaze. So every healing journey thread, every I learned to love myself carousel on Instagram, every I cut off toxic people and now I'm thriving or something, is part of this theater. It's not empty, it's ritual. The ritual of showing that we're trying to be good, that we deserve to be visible. So visibility has become a moral currency. To be unseen is to fail socially and even spiritually. To be visible in the right way, aligned with the aesthetics of empathy and vulnerability and awareness, is to be good. But that's what makes it so dangerous. Because when virtue becomes visible, then goodness becomes a brand. And moral life, which should be private and conflicted and contradictory and messy, becomes a performance that's optimized for clarity. So the self stops being a mystery and becomes a product. The authentic self, the healed self, the empowered self, whatever, these are all products, This is something that the philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the achievement society, which is a world where self-exploitation masquerades as self-expression. This is a world where we turn our psychic wounds into content because silence feels like failure. And yet, the more we display ourselves, the less we feel ourselves. Because every act of visibility demands self-translation, like a flattening of experience into something consumable. We live in a society that moralizes exposure, where not showing yourself or not engaging with the online space is suspicious somehow, where the private, the intimate, and the opaque and the ambiguous, which is everything that Freud called the unconscious, has to be algorithmically legible to count as real. And this is what I mean by moral theater. We're not lying, we're just performing sincerity because we don't know what that means anymore. We're not hiding, we're trying to make ourselves transparent to be seen. But transparency under capitalism is obedience and nothing else. So when we judge narcissists, when we call someone a narcissist for showing too much, maybe next time ask yourself, who the fuck told you that visibility was moral to begin with? Who benefits when your virtue depends on being seen? The next layer that we have to talk about is envy, because I believe that under every accusation of narcissism is envy. And not the petty kind, not I wish I had your followers type shit, but something deeper. The kind that hides beneath moral judgment, behind every they're so full of themselves or they only care about attention, Because attention is what we all want. Stop lying. We just want to believe that we deserve it for the right reason. Freud called envy the shadow of love. It's what happens when admiration curdles, in a way. You want what the other has, so not their possessions, but their wholeness, their ease, their self-certainty. But because you can't admit that desire without wounding your pride, you convert it into moral superiority. I am not like them. That is repression in its purest form. It's desire dressed up as disgust. So envy, and I think Lacan would agree with me here, is born in the mirror. When you see someone else who appears whole, what you actually see is your own lack reflected back at you. The other person becomes the imaginary rival, which is not an enemy, but a distorted echo of your own incompleteness. So you love and hate them for embodying what you think you lost. And that's why social media feels so psychologically charged. Every image online has a potential rival. Someone else's happiness, someone else's confidence, someone else's peace, all serve as projections of what we've been taught to believe that we're missing. So it's not just envy of what they have, it's envy of how seamlessly they seem to be, how coherent they are. We live in a mirror hall where everyone is pretending to have resolved the contradictions of being human. And the ones who seem most sure of themselves, like the fucking unapologetic, self-loving, I don't care what anyone thinks type, becomes like lightning rods for envy. They've claimed a freedom that we secretly crave, the freedom to not need permission. And that's the forbidden desire, not to possess others, but to possess oneself, to be self-sufficient, to exist without needing to be mirrored. But our culture does not permit that kind of independence. It calls it arrogance, detachment, and, drumroll, narcissism. Because self-sufficiency breaks the cycle of mutual surveillance that holds the social order together. It threatens the moral economy, where everyone has to prove their goodness through constant self-discourse and emotional labor. Fanon saw this in the colonial relationship. The colonized subject was taught to envy the colonizer's self-possession, to desire their freedom while being told it was impossible. So the colonizer became both ideal and obstacle at the same time, like an impossible mirror. The more the colonized imitated them, the more they were called narcissistic. Does that sound familiar? The same logic still shapes our personal lives. We call women narcissistic for loving themselves too publicly. We call marginalized people narcissistic for asserting identity too loudly. We call creators narcissistic for wanting to be seen on their own terms. In each case, narcissist means you have taken a kind of power that wasn't meant for you. Sarah Ahmed might call this a matter of orientation. So like how some bodies are permitted to move freely towards self-love while others are told that their confidence is a threat. So envy is political. It's not just an emotion, it's a structure of permission. And that's what makes it so difficult to untangle. Because when you feel envy, you're not just seeing someone else's life, you're seeing the outline of your own limit, the places that you've been taught not to go. So maybe envy isn't something to suppress or to moralize. Maybe it's just something to listen to. Because envy points toward what you've been forbidden to want. And when you can look at it honestly, without turning it into shame or judgment, envy becomes a kind of revelation. It tells you what you desire most deeply, which is obviously freedom from dependence, freedom from justification, and freedom from the mirror. But what do we do with all of this? Envy, the projection, the moral theater. The short answer is egoistic. Just stop pretending. Just stop pretending that your desire to be seen is a proof of sickness. Stop pretending that your need for validation makes you weak. Stop pretending that narcissism belongs to you. Because the truth is, narcissism isn't the enemy, self-deception is. The moment that you admit that your love, your virtue, your self-awareness is also a performance, that you need the gaze as much as anyone, something shifts, you know? You stop being ruled by the performance. And that is kind of the egoist turn. You reclaim your dependency instead of hiding from it. You say, yes, I do want to be seen. Yes, I do want to be seen as this particular thing. Who wants to come see me that way, you know? Who wants to engage in a kind of, mutual relationship where this is the reality that we promote and present to each other for each other. And then you kind of make that performance your own. Freud taught that repression sustains the illusion of control, but Max Stirner would say that illusion itself is the spook, the sacred idea that we serve without knowing it. But in their own way, both understood the same truth. Freedom doesn't mean purity. It's lucidity. So egoism isn't about inflating the self. It's about seeing through it. It's a kind of thing that I have previously referred to as felt power. Seeing the I as something fluid, contingent, and relational, but no longer sacred. It's realizing that the self that you perform and the mirror that you polish, the gaze that you chase, all of it can be yours. It can belong to you once you stop believing that it has to be moral, that it has to be virtuous, that it has to be XYZ. And in a way, that's the paradox of liberation. It comes with massive responsibility. You kind of only stop being a narcissist once you allow yourself to be a narcissist. So my advice would be, don't deny the mirror, just play with it. Know that your reflection is temporary and that the gaze will always shift and that selfhood is actually just improvisation. And in that knowing, you are free to act without justification. You can then love yourself without apology. You can desire attention without shame. You can seek recognition without pretending it's moral, because you're no longer confusing visibility and aesthetics with virtue. And this is not cynicism. This is literally just clarity. It's the refusal to moralize being human. The wish to be seen, the longing to be loved, and the drive to exist in relation to others is the most normal thing. So in a way, that egoistic act is kind of psychological honesty, and it doesn't destroy the mirror. You can't destroy the mirror. It just kind of unspooks it. It looks straight at the gaze and says, you no longer define me. You are just part of the game. And once you can do that, the narcissist stops becoming a threat. They become a reflection of something that you've repressed, yes, but also of something that you can reclaim. The unapologetic desire to exist. So the narcissist is not the fucking problem. They're just the symptom of a culture that forbids self-possession while demanding self-performance. So stop performing innocence. Own your ego and let the mirror serve you.